Well, it is so unbelievable. Here we are sitting in the middle of May. First of all, National Foster Care Awareness Month. I have to give a big shout out to my friends over at ABC. Elaine, thank you so much for having me on. Really helping to educate people about kids who are in foster care. I think it's so, so important that, we take every opportunity we can to talk about foster care. But listen, if you're going to give me a month, I'm going to use every single moment of that month to make sure that we are educating people about how we can truly help them. The fact is that kids come into the system because of choices other people made. The trauma that they experience, I can tell you firsthand as someone who aged out of the system and also a father who has adopted 5 kids out of foster care. But the one thing that I will tell you that I noticed when my children arrived is the lack of affection in the beginning. The thing that I remember as a young boy was the lack of affection. I think that we as humans don't realize how important that touch is, how important as we grow, even as when we're young and we grow, even at 58, there is nothing more than I absolutely love than when one of my children come over and they hug me, or even when I'm leaving to go to work and my husband gives me a hug. My next guest, she realized that, and she is one of those people who she took it to action. And I am so, so excited. So I would like to welcome Amy. You're for the Cubs. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
Oh, I am so excited to chat. Love your accent, by the way.
Thank
You
you.
know that we do have an office in the UK where we serve 84,000 children in the United Kingdom. So is that what your accent is? Or
No,
is it
you're
Australian?
it is. You're
It's
right.
Australian. Okay, so I have to tell you a real quick story before we get into the Cubs. We have a young boy. Oh my gosh, amazing kid. He twice his family's come here from Australia, and he took his vacation time and volunteered here at the National Center. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
That's
so
awesome.
now he's in Australia and he's making these little they're like these little clay turtles and he sells them and he gives the proceeds to our organization.
That's
So
amazing. What a
Elijah
legend.
is amazing. And so last year I gave him the International Kids Helping Kids Award. And I was so, so excited
Okay.
about that. So
Oh,
love you, Australia, for all those people that are getting ready to watch this, because I know my friend Elijah is going to spread the news and his mom and his dad. But listen, let's jump into this. Let's talk about For the Cubs. There is nothing like a good stuffy. I say it all the time. So let our listeners and viewers know exactly what is For the Cubs.
so For the Cubs is products for little kids eating, sleeping, and soothing. But where it all began was when I was going through foster care training to become a foster parent. I you're always taught about how to care for kids from hard places, but underneath that, you're learning a lot about how the nervous system works and how humans work. So when we were going through understanding the nervous system, I learned that we needed 8 to 12 hugs a day as humans to
The
uh,
12 hugs a
yeah,
day. I was so, hearing that number. And by the way, forever, all of you that are watching and know this, I actually consider Amy my friend. So this isn't our first conversation, but, to hear her say 8 to 10 hugs a day, as somebody who knows, I actually have people, Amy, I'm not kidding you. They say there is nothing better than getting a hug from Rob Scheer. Because when Rob Scheer hugs, he truly hugs from the heart. And it's so true. And so the fact that now I get to tell people, I get to give 8 to 12 of these a day to somebody,
yeah,
I absolutely love that. So it is scientifically proven that 8 to 10 hugs a day truly makes a difference for a human.
absolutely. And if you think about sort of how that works in our like existence as humans, humans need connection. They need belonging. They need that relationship to be able to exist in the world. And you see a lot of studies talking about the importance as people age, the importance of maintaining relationship and connection. Well, that's true of human existence. And so having connection to people is really critical. And a big way to articulate that connection is through a hug. But in addition to that, thinking about how our nervous system regulates itself, deep pressure therapy is something we see a lot of like popular things like weighted blankets and things like that that are there to help sort of create that same experience. And one of the challenges that I've experienced personally with weighted blankets was I get claustrophobic. So
That's like me.
so having sort of that balance of being able to develop and deliver that experience of a hug while being considerate of all of the different sensory needs that people have is really critical. But the idea of being able to offer a hug to someone, it really helps people calm their nervous system, lower their blood pressure, take more quality breath, all of the things that really help us center ourselves. And I think that's the piece that is really striking to me and is something that's been really striking as I've launched and grown for the Cubs. Because initially I set out to build this kids brand for eating, sleeping, and soothing, knowing that those sort of three core things start at home to build belonging. What I didn't realize was how hungry the world was for more connection of all ages. And so now thinking through sort of the impact of what it means to offer a hug, there are adults that are in need of a hug because they may not have a huge community, but they still are human and they still need connection and they still need support. And so, one of the really beautiful things and one of the biggest honors that I've had is being able to help people of all ages access that connection, the support, and the regulation that they really need to be able to carry on with their day and really be who they truly are.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And one of the things that and I'm going to play devil's advocate right now. So, we have gone through such a shift within our society of the not touching, the not, I grew up as a young boy in the system where there was no affection within our home. I was the foster kid. And then I had made it a point that when I started to have kids, that affection was going to be very important. But then all of a sudden, my kids have been with us now for 16 years. All of a sudden, I see a shift where, we don't see teachers hugging kids like they used to. We don't see people hugging and then we had the pandemic, which even put us even further back. And we read so much about how kids and even adults are so distant between that fact. What do you say about that?
I think that human connection definitely is always important, but when we're in spaces where sometimes touch from another person can also be too much.
Yeah.
And so having resources and tools that allow you to access that regulation and helps you I sort of call it compounding comfort. Because the more that you can learn to layer on these tools like deep pressure therapy, like scent, like sound, and surrounding yourself with things that are layers of comfort that help you learn how to regulate your nervous system more effectively are really critical when there are these dynamics that are continuing to evolve and shift and change, where that does become very complex and it does become very hard to navigate for different parties. And so I'm thinking about the more that we can support individuals with how to really compound their comfort so that when I think about it, like being a regulated person, yes, you feel calm, but what it allows you to do is make better decisions, to show up for people differently, and to really sort of exist in the world as your truest form. And when I think about kids in foster care, that is something that I think I look at that as a foster parent, and I believe my role is to give the child the space to feel safe and be the truest form of who they are. I want them to have that opportunity. And so when I think about that at a larger scale, being able to create these resources for compounding comfort really means that I'm able to extend that impact to kids, not just in foster care, but
Right.
people everywhere.
Yeah, the fact is that, I remember, vividly my kids arriving, and my first four kids arrived. They were 2, 4, 2, and 6 months. And, I could see within their eyes the lack of affection. And also, my daughter at the age of 4, how, a touch kind of scared her a little bit. And at that point, we knew that there had been some things that had happened. And it took us a long time for her to feel comfortable enough to run and jump into her daddy's arms and give me that hug. And I'll never forget that. And even my oldest son, who we adopted at the age of 18, who came into our home with, you could say, with little to no affection whatsoever. Now he's 24 and he has no problem giving his dad a big hug when I see him. Um,
Mm.
the thing is that there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to foster care, when it comes to, these bad kids who we all know is so inaccurate. How is For the Cubs helping that?
One of my big goals when I became a foster parent was had the really hard realization that there were some really heavy, dark myths about foster care and kids in foster care. And when I would tell people, oh, I'm going to be a foster parent, and I was so excited. I was like really thrilled that I was going to be able to help these kiddos when they needed help the most. And I would hear stories of like, oh, well, so and so's like cousin, they like had kids in foster care in their house and they did X, Y, and Z. And I was like, if this is people's first response,
Yeah.
we've got a really, really big problem. And so the big objective with for the Cubs is to help sort of bridge that gap between understanding who these kiddos are. Because like you said, they're in foster care not by their own choice, but the choices of others.
Thank
And
you. I say that I literally say that in almost every single talk I give, is that people must realize, listen up, everybody who's watching and viewing that. You hear me say it out of my mouth all the time. Kids come in foster care because of choices other people made, not a choice that they made. And by the way, if you were to talk to any of these kids, they would rather stay with their neglected, abusive parents than go into the system. So to think that they want to be there, to think that they place themselves there, to think that they did something to be there is such the myth that I believe, Amy, that we need to squash immediately.
couldn't agree more. And I think that the challenge is the behaviors and how trauma articulates itself in any given human, not just kids in foster care, but human, is different across the board. And so when I think of like kiddos having a really hard time and the choices that they're not actually making them because it's just how their trauma is presenting, that really is a picture of what they experienced and how they're processing it.
Yes.
And so when I think about that, I want people through For the Cubs to have more access to understanding foster care because what I have found is that it's a really hard subject for people to wrap their minds around. It's a really hard conversation to have when it comes to helping people unpack the realities that foster care actually is a lot closer to them than they realize.
Yes. Yes.
It
And I think it's kind of amazing how many people I find when I tell my story and I talk to people, and how many people are like, I knew somebody who was in foster care, or I was in, and they're able to start talking about it and able to start, when we start putting faces to situations, it makes it really different. It makes it how we feel. One of the things that, we have been trying to do for 13 years at Comfort Cases is trying to get people to change their vocabulary. Stop calling them foster children. Call them children who are experiencing foster care. Because as soon as you put that F word in front of them, you get back to that myth of what did they do? They are bad. And by the way, no matter whether you are a foster parent, your children are, through surrogacy, your children are through natural birth, you do not know how the behavior is going to be with your children. It happens, it just so happens that the kids in the system, they have so much more added trauma. But I can tell you firsthand as a dad of five children from the system, you're able to peel that trauma away. You're able to have, I mean, I've got three that are heading off to college this fall. And one of them, when he was 5 years old, we were told we should institutionalize him. And I look at this 18-year-old boy now who's not only going to college, but has received a huge scholarship to a beautiful college in Florida, Lynn University. I'll give you a big shout out there. But this is a kid, but you know what? The fact is, kids are resilient. Kids are resilient, and all kids are resilient. One of the things you also talk about is corporate brands should support those that are in need. I truly believe that corporations have a corporate responsibility to support the foundation of our communities. How do you feel about that?
It's a big part of why I wanted to start my own brand because I've been in marketing my entire career and I would always gravitate towards roles where giving back was a part of the brand. And then I was always incredibly disappointed to find that it was more of a checkbox than a real commitment. And so it was always like a only if we achieve X can we do Y. Whereas with For the Cubs, I always give back and I give back every quarter.
Love
I
that.
don't wait until the end of the year and I've got like all of my nice profit and loss statement tied up and I decide how much I want to offer. I do it every quarter because the need is always there,
Yes,
every single day.
yes,
So I have worked that into how the business model works because I will always give back. And I always want my customers to know that every time they choose to swipe their credit card and they're trusting me with their purchase, they can be assured that they are giving back to a kid that needs something very simple, very basic. And oftentimes it's the adults that show up with no expectations at all that will stand in those gaps that make a lifetime of difference for these kids. And sometimes they never meet those adults, but just the fact that someone has shown up in some way, shape, or form means the world. And so I want to really push that forward and create access to foster care that isn't as daunting, isn't as intimidating as having to sort of hear the heavy stories all in one go, but really sharing information and solving some of those myths because we can't rebrand foster care because the system's the system.
right.
However, we can advocate for changes in language. We can advocate for reframing how we look at kids in care and how we sort of think about the role of foster care because unfortunately it doesn't really discriminate because the people who are affected by addiction and mental illness and struggles of that nature, those things touch everybody.
Exactly. We all have fallen once in our life, by the way, and some of us have fallen more than once. And the fact is, that does not make us a bad person.
Mm-mm.
Sometimes it's just the choices that we make have been not the greatest choices. And that's why I think so many times when it comes to the system, and you and I could have this conversation for hours, is, we are so gung ho to jump and take a child out of a home instead of going in and maybe stabilizing the home. Maybe the mom needs a little bit of extra money to keep the lights on. Maybe she does need some parenting classes. I always have thought to myself, ever since getting out of the system and aging out and I was homeless and why somebody couldn't have come into my house and stabilized my family. Why can't you foster the family? Because
Mm.
when you're looking at 64% of kids who enter the system is because of the one word neglect, we're not talking about abuse. I have children that have arrived with me with broken ribs. That's abuse, okay?
Mhm.
But I also have kids that arrived with me that if their mother just had been given a helping hand, maybe she wouldn't. And the problem is once your kids come into the system, you're immediately looked at as you're a bad parent. And I think that stigma that we place on the birth parents is so, it's just like I said, you and I could talk about that forever. But I love the fact that your company for the Cubs gives back. You know, my friend Kelly, she actually does the same thing with her company. You know, my friend Carrie, she has block bags. She does the same thing. And I only want to work with companies that give back to their communities. And by the way, our listeners, our viewers, they feel the same exact way. Exactly how can we, what we can we do for you? How can we, go to your website, order, for the Cubs, and then it gets donated to kids who are in foster care. Tell our listeners and viewers how they can reach out to you.
Absolutely. So, the biggest thing as someone who has self-funded this business, I have not gone out to VCs and raised money because I didn't want the forcing function of the demands of growth to impact the business model to be able to give back. So, I have intentionally been protective of that. And the biggest thing that helps is people looking at the site, shopping at the site, sharing with friends, following us on social media. If it's not a case of us offering the products that are a fit for you or friends and family, just sharing
Yeah.
the brand is means so much to me, because it means that we're getting out to people and really sort of reaching people who may need the products like a Percy, like the diffuser, the sound machine, things to help them regulate. And in turn, you can be very, very confident that every quarter I'll be looking to give back to kids in foster care to make sure that they are getting the things that they need.
Love that. I love that. Listen up, everybody. Again, there is nothing better than an amazing conversation, especially when it's your friend. The fact is that each and every one of you, I ask this quite often. Do me a big favor. Go over to my friend Amy's website. Look at the products that she has. I'm telling you right now, these are products that are soothing. These are things that could, maybe you didn't realize that, that diffuser could actually help you relax a little bit more, bring your blood pressure down. Maybe you do know that you have a new child that's getting ready to come into your home because you took the step to be a foster parent, which, by the way, thank you if you did that. But maybe there are items there can make that first night a little smoother for when that child does arrive. Listen, everyone, it's National Foster Care Awareness Month. Every single day, I hope you do what my friend Jennifer Perry says all the time, and that is talk. Talk about it around the water cooler. Talk about foster care. We need to normalize this as much as we can. And do me a big favor, change your vocabulary. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.